Time for our Capitol Report this week. Pat McGuigan is here, and we're talking about the primary elections. They're coming up on June 26th. Give us an overview of what we're going to see and any surprises we may see.
Well, it's not a surprise. It's a comment to say that Republicans now have the majority, not all, but the majority of the most interesting primaries. And in one case, the State Corporation Commission for the next 6-year term, the seat now held by incumbent Republican Bob Anthony, he's being challenged by Brooks Mitchell. No independent and no Democrat filed for November, so it will be decided on Tuesday, June 26th by the Republicans. That's the only statewide race, other than, of course, the presidential race and some ballot questions that'll come up in November. So that's significant, and that's probably the most interesting thing about the race, is that Republicans are so dominant now that they're in that position. Having said that, in the Second Congressional District, the seat now held by Dan Boren, there's a competitive Democratic primary. At the risk of offending someone, I'm going to say I think that Rob Wallace will probably win that. He's a former district attorney and has the support of former Governor Brad Henry. Then on the Republican side, you have a truly wide open primary of 6 people. Markwayne Mullin is ahead in the polls, and then there's 3 guys competing for the second position. State Representative George Faught, Wayne Pettigrew, former state representative from Edmond, and then Dakota Woods, a retired Marine Corps colonel. Now that's a very interesting race because a dynamic has emerged late of, although Mullin has the spending advantage and appears to be in the driver's seat, he's having trouble with an arrest of a former employee that happened in 2009. Stories have been detailed, CapitolBeatOK, now the Washington Times, as well as the Claremore Progress and the Tulsa World, and he has some issues, and I don't know how it'll affect the outcome. Finally, House District 88 here in Oklahoma City is going to be interesting because you have a total of 4 Democrats running for the nomination of the seat that used to be held by Al McCaffrey. So the Democrats also have some interesting primaries. Then there's a couple of Republicans. On the Democratic side, you'd have to handicap it in their favor, and it looks like it's a race between Steve Cortez and Mike Dover. We'll see how that turns out. Not a surprise, a description of a competitive race. Finally, in Edmond, Senate District 41, the race that's been getting a lot of attention, incumbent Clark Jolly versus Paul Blair, the preacher at Fairview Baptist. That race is highly competitive, even though Jolly has all the money advantage. And then there's been a controversial involvement late of a super PAC, which is doing some very negative messaging on Blair. So we'll see how that plays out.
Okay, and talk about the Tea Party's influence on these primaries.
I'm going to keep that short. I think it might be overstated, but I will say, and in at least 2 cases in the House, it's kind of interesting because incumbents are being challenged for being too Tea Party. I guess you could say too much in the Tea Party direction. For example, in House District 88, Sally Kern is being challenged, and that's basically the guy's contention that she is paying too much attention to those kinds of issues. Now, having said that, the Tea Party element is important in that it's pushing the Republicans even more in a conservative direction. I will say, however, I think that super PAC issue that's impacting several races might be a more significant factor, at least in the primary.
Okay, and now the Supreme Court could be ruling any day now about the constitutionality of Obamacare. Give us an update on that.
Yeah, the federal health care law, of course, been controversial since the very beginning, and all I'll say is that regardless of what happens, the states have options. First of all, to work within the law if it's upheld. I don't think that's likely. I think what's most likely is either the individual mandate for insurance coverage is thrown out and the rest of the law upheld, or some additional pieces of the law are struck down. I sat in on a really interesting teleconference the other day that involved Florida Governor Rick Scott and a couple of policy analysts. And the bottom line is, in the areas of, if the law is struck down, in the areas of pre-existing conditions, health care for the poor, greater use of physician assistants and nurse practitioners, medical liability and lawsuit reform, in all of those areas there's rooms for the states to take proactive action, and about 34 of them already have. So we'll see. Once we have a decision, then we have something specific to talk about.
All right, lots going on around here in politics. Thanks so much, Pat. Have a great weekend, folks.